on eliminating peat from propagation using growing media blocks. I'm going to hand you over to Audrey, and for anyone who's just joining, we are recording this, so if you're not comfortable with that, please turn your cameras off. Okay, I'll hand over to you then, Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to see so many people along, and some people who've got probably a lot more experience than I have in making growing media and making blocks. So that's fantastic. Everybody can learn from each other. So what we're going to speak about tonight, and it's not going to be so much me chatting, it's hopefully going to be more Robin and also the growers that have been the host of this trial. A very brief background, the aims of the trial and who's involved, what we actually did in terms of methods. We're going to really concentrate tonight on the results of the growing trials and how the growers found it. And the growers are from Tombreck up in Highland, Perthshire here, also East Neuk in Fife and Western Lawrence up in Murray. We've done quite a bit of analysis of laboratory analysis of some of the growing media as well. I just don't have time to talk about that, but I'm going to make sure that people get the results from that, and we all can learn from what we've done in that respect as well. And Galia is going to speak about some of the ongoing work, the information gathering exercise that we're doing, both under Innovative Farmers and also the Pebble Trust. And hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. I've got some questions myself, apart from anything else. So we're still using peat. We're using far too much peat in our production systems, but peat is a finite resource. It's best left in the ground. It's best restored, but we found it very challenging to find good alternatives for use in growing media. I'm learning a lot about this subject at the moment. So this small project, aimed to eliminate peat from our production systems, minimise the use of plastic, and we're looking at vegetable and salad production through the use of nursery-produced composts, then nursery-produced growing media, and then we're making blocks based on hot bin compost, soil, leaf mould, and coarse washed sand. So what we're trying to do is put a little bit of science background into some very, very practical work on the composting and growing media production. Also, I'm very, very keen to try to avoid the confusion that often surrounds discussions about composts and growing media. So we've very clearly defined the keywords used in the project. So by compost, we don't mean a growing medium. By compost, we mean an organic material that's been made through self-generated heating and aeration of organic materials, or organic wastes, if you like, to produce a lovely stable material. And that itself can be used in growing media or growing mediums. But we don't normally use composts on their own. I know some people do, and I know it's possible, but that's not what we're doing here. A growing medium is something that we're using to sow seeds in and to grow plants. So that's the ways we've defined them. And we're hoping that everybody learns a bit in this project about composting and about growing media. And we're hoping to learn as much as we can about current relevant work going on elsewhere. We did some preliminary work looking at the performance of proprietary, in other words, bought or off the shelf, if you like, amateur and professional growing media. I have to admit, I suspected this, but I was pretty shocked. I think many of us were quite shocked at how poor, particularly some of the amateur bagged growing media actually are. We didn't have a very low bar to get above. We then did 4 main trials. We did 2 trials at Tombreck and 1 at East Neuk Growers and 1 at Western Launceston. And by that, I mean we made our own compost. We used those composts to manufacture growing media. We made grow blocks. We sowed seeds in them of 3 plant species, and then we measured the performance. We're also busy still on a literature review and information gathering exercise to look at what other growers and other research organisations have done and are doing. I know some growers have been at this for really quite a long time. I know particularly Ian Tolhurst has published and shared a huge amount of really useful information, and also Margie Leonardson and Judith Conroy and Frances Rains have got long experience in this. So we're trying to gain as much information from other people as we can, to write our guidance documents, our final report, and also share as much with them as we possibly can about what we've done. So we're writing some guidance notes as well. I've written 3 so far, and there's going to be another 2, I reckon, before the project is finished. So here's our hosts. We've got Wester Lawrence and Farm, as I say, that's Murray, Pam Rodway. And now Pam's husband, Nick, who is no longer with us, really started this work in Scotland quite a long time ago, a number of years ago. And Pam and her team are continuing that legacy. And then we've got Connie Hunter and Tom Booth, East Nuke Market Garden, which is in Fife, and Rachel and Ian at Tom Brett Farm in Highland Perthshire here. So, as I say, what we did, we firstly made hot bin compost. Now, I've never used those before. I'm not entirely certain that this is necessary. I'm not entirely certain that I'm a fan of this now, not least because it uses plastic, sort of insulated plastic bins. I don't do that in my own garden. I use a longer composting time, 6 months to a year, and I use a simple hand-built wooden composting system, and it works perfectly well. However, we did, after a few sticky starts, we found that the hot bin compost actually worked pretty well. Now, the recipes were different on different nurseries, and I put the recipes into slides here. You won't be able to read it all at once, but they already are in the guidance documents, those recipes, so you can see what we've done. All the constituents are locally sourced from those nurseries. Absolutely no peat in them. They've got to be suitable for blocking, so make a slightly sticky compost perhaps, and suitable for raising veg salad seedlings in. And well, largely free of viable weed propagules. We didn't manage that. Compost was not hot enough for long enough. So I'm not going to concentrate on this because we've got this information in the guidance documents, but that just kind of shows you what was in the vegan compost mixes. We made a vegan compost mix on each nursery, and we made a non-vegan. And basically the vegan doesn't contain any animal products like wool or dung, for example, whereas or feathers, the non-vegan contains some animal manures, various types, and perhaps fur and feathers or wool and feathers. Bracken was a popular feedstock, and this magical stuff called ramial wood chip. I must admit, in my own garden, I pretty much don't use anything else. Now, that was me that discovered that, and I was really excited to find that Ben Raskin and Ian Tolhurst have discovered exactly the same. So there's something a bit magical about ramial wood chip, about the wood chip made from relatively small branches. So certainly less than 6 or 7 centimeters in diameter. Mine is actually less than that even. And then there was various other things that we put in as well. A mixture of high nitrogen fleshy materials or dungy materials, and high carbon materials such as brown bracken and the wood chip. So I'll skim over that. Then once we had some of our composts were actually not very mature at all. Worryingly immature, I felt, actually. Some of them were only about 3 months old, but they performed really well. Now, we didn't use the whole compost. We passed them through sieves, 10mm sieve and then a 6mm sieve. So we were using the more broken down material from the compost bins, but they worked really well. So we chose only constituents to add that we could get from the nurseries. I'll just put onto the next slide here. That's the compost being mixed, ready for sieving there. This is what we used, and we used the same recipe on all nurseries. And this was something which I know Pam and Nick had used in the past on their previous projects. Now, this is not a recipe that you could make and then sell to somebody else, because it takes quite a long time to source sufficient leaf mold of the right quality. We're also using coarse river sand. Well, I live beside a river and it's easy for me to get that from my one. And loamy soil, I was very careful where I took that from. Very careful to take it from. I certainly would never take the loamy soil from my own garden, which has a history of long-term horticultural crop production for decades. And my garden soil is full of Phytophthora and lots of other nasty diseases like verticillium. So I would never use that. I chose the soil deliberately from long-term species-rich pasture, and it was out of molehills. We didn't sterilize it because we were deliberately embracing the microbiology that was in there and hoping that it was beneficial, and it worked. As simple as this. So I'll say a little bit more about this later if I've got time. I don't know whether I will have time, but the whole microbiology aspect of the testing has been really exciting, as it poses more questions perhaps than it answers, but it's still very exciting. Okay, then we made the grow blocks. We used the Ladbroke hand blocking tools, 4 module ones for peas and 5 module ones for kale and lettuce. And we all had a practice until we managed to make cohesive and firm blocks. Quite easy, but quite time consuming, frankly. Then we made the blocks for the trial. We had several volunteers on at Tom Breck. I was involved with that trial. So it was done reasonably quickly and it was a lot of fun, but it still is pretty time consuming. I cannot imagine a big nursery or a big commercial nursery being able to spend the time doing this, but I'm interested in hearing the growers' views on this. There's quite a lot to it. Sourcing the compost ingredients, then the compost production, then sourcing the growing media ingredients, then mixing it all together, then making the blocks, setting them out and sowing them. Quite a lot of work. So we set the blocks out on capillary matting on plastic trays in a replicated randomized block design. We also had 1 or in some cases 2 control treatments. I used compost from my own garden in a medium, which was a sort of control. That was not made in a hot bin. It was made in a sort of 1.2 cubic meter cubed wooden framed compost bin, if you like, over a period of about 9 months in the first instance and about a year for the second trial. 2 trials also included another control as well as, we used Moorland Gold, which is peat based, but it's based on a filtered peat, filtered out as a waste, if you like, from drinking water supplies. And then we also used Classman peat-free or reduced peat media as well. We sowed 12 blocks of peas for a plot and 15 blocks of kale or lettuce for a plot. And as I say, we had 3 replicates of each. And at each nursery, this is when we covered them up with protective mesh just to stop mice getting them and to help keep the moisture in, to protect them until the young seedlings were through and they were watered regularly. We tried to give each tray the same amount roughly of watering. And this is the trial at Tom Breck when it was during one of its assessments. And Robin will explain what we actually achieved in a minute and what the results actually suggest. But we were looking at percentage germination on several dates and also plant fresh weight at the end. Now, just before I let Robin take over, I want to say very briefly that we also did a lot of laboratory testing as well as that, and we tested chemical and physical properties of all the growing media and some of the constituents, and we also tested kind of soil food web tests on all the constituents and all the growing media as well. We've got heaps of results on that. There is not time to talk about it today, but there will be opportunities to learn about that. So we tested some of the constituents, the composts, the leaf mold, particularly in the molehill soil for biological tests mainly. All the nursery made growing media were tested for chemical and biological tests, and also 2 of the proprietary control media were tested as well. Some chemical, but certainly also the biological tests. It's very, very interesting indeed. And these are the things that we tested for. What I was trying to do was understand why some media performed better than others. So were there any microbiological reasons for the good performance or the poor performance? or chemical reasons, or physical reasons. So we wanted to try to relate the results to plant performance, which we've not finished doing yet. That's what one of the reports looks like. So it's incredibly detailed. This is one only on leaf mold, and we've got many different sets of results all along the same lines. I'm going to hand over to Robin now to talk about the results from the plant growth trial, so the germination and also the growth. How do I stop sharing my screen, Laura?
Probably the little share button at the top right with an arrow in it.
Okay. No, it just.
It should be.
I think maybe you have to just share yours, Robin. Is that right?
Well, I don't know. I shall try.
Give it a go. Yep, that seems to be working.
All right,
Great.
excellent, good. So so I'm, as Audrey said, I'm Robin Walker. So I'm based at SRUC, Scotland's Royal College, in Aberdeen at the Crabeston campus. And my role here was really to try and make some sense of the results in terms of, as Audrey said, the percentage germination that we were getting from the different treatments. And I've probably gone down the rabbit hole of calling it compost, but it's compost-based growing media. So if you see compost, that's what I'm referring to in the slides. So yeah, and basically, I'll just move on to the next. Hopefully, this is going to move on. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about the three growers, the three areas that the trials took place at. And I'll start with West of Lawrenceston, and germination percentage at several points in the period, and also the early biomass as well. Once they'd grown a little bit, so that's the same essentially for all of the three places that did the experiments themselves. The crops were consistent as well across. I don't know if am I got a pointer? I don't know. Can you see my mouse?
Yeah, we can see your mouse.
Right, okay,
yeah.
right, good. I could use that as a pointer. So peas, lettuce, and kale were the three crop types that were used as a comparison, and that was the same for all the different sites as well. In West of Lawrenceston, the particular experiment was the composts, obviously in the growing media, was the control, which Audrey's already kind of given a bit of background to, and then there was the vegan and the non-vegan versions as well. And then in this instance, there were 3 time points as well. And there's obviously a lot of results, but I'm just going to focus on the significant results. And actually, I kind of stuck in a few close to significant results as well for some of them, just to add a bit more. So not necessarily significant, but, borderline based on that. And because the trials were set up using a replicated block, essentially, I've used analysis of variance to get the assessments there. So so I'll just move that out of the way. So what we've got here is the germination of lettuce. So lettuce is the crop. This was one of the ones that showed some significance. And you can see here, these are the dates when the samples were actually taken in terms of the germination, and the percentage up the side here. So of the 3 assessment dates, the treatment effect was significant. So that's really good. And if you kind of look across all 3 of these, you can see the last one, the non-vegan one, was slightly lower than the others. If we looked at the assessment date itself, there was no real significance between the 3 different times that they were done, and there was no interaction either between the date or the treatment. So there's a little bit of an influence there. So no difference between the control and the vegan composts. Both showed higher lettuce germination percentage across the period than the non-vegan compost, but it was fairly small. The other thing that's probably really important to say is, because we had these controls, these commercially available materials that we're using as a control, anything that was not significant, or if any of the products that would be produced by the growers was better, we took that as a big plus. So although there's a lot of non-significant results, which I'm not showing, that actually shows that what was being produced is actually really quite exciting, quite positive. So that's a consistent thing through the rest of this part of the presentation. And I'm sure Audrey will go back to that later on as well. Right. Another thing, lettuce seemed to be one of the out of the three species was one of the ones that seemed to kind of show differences quite a lot. This is for the biomass, so this is based on 12 small lettuce plants that we spoke about at the start in terms of the design. But there was definitely a significant treatment effect, and you can see here that the vegan compost here was particularly prolific, and it was actually better than the control as well, and the non-vegan as well. So you can see the difference there between the three. So this is really positive in terms of this particular growing media being significantly higher, well, a lot higher actually than the other ones. If we move, that was it really. They were the significant results from West Lauriston. As I said, exciting as they are, particularly because the non-significant aspects as well are still highly relevant actually. So Tombreck had two sets of growth trials going on. So they're subtly different, same measurements, percentage germination and early biomass, and the three crops were the same as well. And then this is where we had an additional one. So this is the one that Audrey was talking about that was based on the one she has in her garden, this Dalmatian, additional sort of control, I guess. And there were also 3 time points as well. So if I move on to the actual results for that. So lettuce again was showing some differences there. The assessment date, there was no significant difference. So basically, although there's a subtle dip here, it didn't come across in terms of all 3 sampling points as we kind of moved across. Treatment difference was almost significant. So it does look, this is kind of showing a subtle difference that the Dalmatian was marginally worse, or arguably marginally worse than the others, but it wasn't actually significant. So that was a subtle trend. But as you moved in towards the end, sort of about 3 weeks later, or 3 or 4 weeks later, there was actually no difference. So basically everything caught up over time at that point in time. Peas, this was one where peas actually showed a difference. So again, almost significant in this case. So 3 assessment dates. So early May, mid-May, and early April, mid-April, and early May. Almost significant. So again, it's a trend rather than a specific thing. In terms of treatment differences, and you can see there's this kind of dip here. So the controls at each point in time, and the Dalmatian one tended to be slightly higher percentage in peas, and the vegan and the non-vegan one slightly lower, but not significantly so. So it's a trend rather than specifics, but they're still pretty good actually. If we're looking at the biomass, so this is for the lettuce. So there were quite big differences here, very big differences actually. So quite clearly the control and the non-vegan treatments were very, pretty effective. And the vegan, Tombreck vegan and the Dalmatian in this instance didn't perform particularly well. And I don't know why that is, but maybe Audrey's got some answers to that in some of the chemical and biological analysis. I'm not sure. We'll maybe find out shortly. Moving on to the second trial that took place at Tombreck. So again, we've essentially got the same set of things that we were looking at: germination percentage and early biomass, and the 3 same species. The difference here is this is where this additional control treatment, this Classman grown media, was brought into it. And there were 2 time points instead of 3 in this particular trial. So again, we've got the early assessment in terms of germination and the later one on the right-hand side. This is for lettuce again. So they said the lettuce seemed to show more differences than some of the other on the whole. Kale didn't really show an awful lot of differences, but lettuce and peas were the 2 that seemed to flourish or not flourish so well in some of the different media. So across 2 assessment dates, there's definitely a treatment difference. And you can see here the Tombreck vegan and the Dalmatian were slightly lower percentage, irrespective of which date you were looking at. And the other three, the two controls and the non-vegan, were all very, very good. So yeah, subtle differences. But again, it's quite nice that the non-vegan one was actually as effective as the in terms of lettuce germination as the two controls that you could buy off the shelf, off the pallet. Peas showed a difference. The Classman romped ahead in this particular one. So again, we've got the same dates in terms of germination. So mid-July and about a week or so later. So yeah, the Classman was performed well compared to the others, and the other ones there was really no significant difference at all. There were much of a muchness there. When we're looking at kale, this is one of the few times where there did seem to be some differences in terms of the kale. There was no treatment difference. The assessment date was significantly different, and there was no interaction. So the assessment date, you can see essentially you've got similar trends between the two dates, but there was an increase in terms of the germination in that sort of week period, whereas some of the other ones actually after a week they'd pretty much all germinated anyway, or the ones that were going to had germinated. So there was an increase in terms of germination over that period. Still relatively low. I don't know whether this is normal percentage that you'd expect in terms of germination, but 40-50%, that's what it came out at anyway, but it did increase over time a little bit. In terms of the biomass, so lettuce showed a difference. Classman's was particularly high. The non-vegan Tom Breck one in this instance was also pretty good, and the control, or the control that was used throughout, and the vegan one and the Dalmatian one were poor in terms of the biomass that was produced. The P one, again, the Classman seemed to perform particularly well, and you can see there's really no difference at all in terms of the other ones in this particular instance. Kale, so again, this was another one where kale actually showed some differences. Classman again was particularly effective. Similar story with the non-vegan as well as in the previous one. Performed, wasn't too far behind, and then the control and the vegan and the Dalmatian ones were trailing a little bit in terms of the productivity at that particular point. And then we move finally on to the East Nuke, or East Nuke, and again, same process, germination percentage and early biomass. The crops grown were exactly the same again, so this is from the same seed batches. And in this instance, there was a control, a vegan and a non-vegan, and there were two germination sampling time points, and then obviously the fresh biomass at the end there. So again, two dates. These were a bit later in the season when these were done in September. So germination of the kale in this instance, this was one of the ones that showed a significant difference. Well, almost a significant difference, should I say. So treatments, and you can see the East Nuke vegan one was just about higher than the others. Can't say it specifically was, but it was very close to being different. So there's a trend there rather than anything else. And there was no difference between the control or the non-vegan one. So again, that's a plus, the fact that we've got composts that were being produced by the group equivalent or better than some of the the control ones that you could buy. In terms of lettuce, in this instance, it's the non-vegan one that stormed ahead out of the ones that were being tested. So the control and the vegan ones were not particularly effective at producing biomass, and the non-vegan one was definitely higher, significantly higher. And that's it, actually. So there were lots and lots of other ones. You could see all the combinations that we had available to us to look at, but I'm seeing lots of non-significant, which sounds on the surface you think, well, that's a bit disappointing, but it was a really positive outcome, I would say, because as I said, we're comparing these materials that are being produced by the growers against what you can buy off the shelf, and the fact that they're coming out for the most part on a par, generally speaking, was really good, and sometimes actually higher. The Classman did seem to be quite effective in terms of the bought materials, but in terms of the other things, I personally think that's actually a really positive thing for what we found from the project as well. So I think that's me at this point.
Okay.
Thanks, Robin. Can I just there was a couple of questions in the chat which related specifically. Firstly, what the Classman product you were specifically referring to. Audrey might.
Yeah, Audrey
well, actually, I think Rachel and Ian at Tom Breck and Tom and Connie are both using Classman. I think they'd probably be better to say what it is that they're using. Tom, are you on mute, or Laura, can you unmute Tom and also Rachel and Ian?
Yeah. Hang on a minute.
I've unmuted myself.
All right, great. Okay, so Tom, you're using one of the Classman products, aren't you?
Yeah, the Classman peat-free organic growing media.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one we use.
That's great. And Rachel and Ian, are you there as well?
We are. I think we were using the peat-based seed mix that they sell. So
I actually thought that yours was reduced peat, was it not?
I mean, it might be reduced peat. They just sell one that has peat and one that doesn't have peat.
Yes, okay.
And it was the one with peat, and it was the one designed for seed.
Yes, yes, the seedling one. That's what I thought. Okay, but right, but you didn't use Tom, you didn't use yours in your trial, did you?
No, we used Moorland Gold.
Yes, that's the same as, yes, we all used Moorland Gold as a control, and it was it's interesting actually. I really don't have time to get into this, but I'll very, very briefly say that neither of the Classman products, and certainly not the Moorland Gold either, these are not sterile, and they're very far from it, which is, I think that's quite an exciting thing and quite a good thing. So it was very obvious when I did the microbiology testing. See, when you test the microbiology of a standard old-fashioned, entirely peat-based growing medium, it's like a biological vacuum. Quite often there's very little in it. And we're now reaping both the rewards and the nightmares associated with the microbiology in non-sterile media. It's a big area of work of mine at the moment. But what we really need to try to be doing is understand a bit more about what's actually in there. And I was quite surprised how much was in the Classman and also the Moorland Gold. These are far from sterile, but there wasn't much in the way of nasty things in there. So we weren't testing particularly for plant pathogens. But one of the things that the test does look at is the different types of nematodes. So you can tell a lot about nematodes quite easily by looking at their mouth parts. And there was quite a lot of nasty plant parasitic nematodes here and there. But in fact, most of the composts and growing media that we looked at had lots of fungal feeders, lots of bacterial feeders, and lots of predators in terms of nematode populations. These are all goodies, and that's what I want. So in future, as we move forward, we need to understand a lot more about the microbiology of what we're making, so that we can then try and actually control what we're making and put lots of biodiversity in there. And by that, I mean microbial biodiversity, because that can help protect plants against disease. But we're really at the early stages of that yet. Anyway, I think we're ready to get the growers themselves to say a little bit. We've got Rachel or Ian going first, and I think Rachel, you said you'd like me to actually ask you the questions because it will probably speed us up.
I was going to say, Audrey, there's one question.
Oh, there's one more question. Yeah. What's the other question? Yeah.
All the seeds were commercial seed, because there was a bit of a query about the kale percentages being quite low in terms of the germination.
It was all. Is Pam with us? Because I think it was Pam that ordered them. They're all from a really good organic, source of they were all organic, and they came from a very reputable seed merchant, and I totally agree. I thought the kale were dreadful.
I am here. I managed to join.
Well done.
And yes, they were all from Tamar Organics, all organic seed. And I was disappointed in the kale. But if that's across the board, then it's nothing to do with us, is it?
Absolutely, and it was across the board. So between us, we did 4 trials, and everybody found that the kale it just wasn't very vigorous.
Yes.
But as you say, it was across the board, so it was nothing to do with any of us. Okay.
Brilliant.
Shall we?
So we're going to hear from the growers now, aren't we?
Yes. So
Rachel?
for Rachel and Ian, I'll ask the questions, because what I was asking really for the growers to say was the same sort of things. I don't need to ask. Some of the growers might just prefer to just chat themselves, but Rachel asked if I would actually ask the questions to remind her what I wanted to do. So for Tom Brett growers, did you find the compost itself in the aero bins, did you find it easy to make, or were there any problems?
It was very easy to make, despite the fact that we were doing it over winter, which was a bit of a surprise. It actually composted quite well. I think the vegan mix had quite a lot of rushes in it, which didn't noticeably break down over the course of time, but we were still able to sieve it and get a decent mix out at the end. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if we'd done it in the warmer months, it might have composted down a bit better or faster, but in any case, it seemed to work okay.
Yeah.
Or the result out of it anyway.
Yes. And as far as the actual growing media itself is concerned, did you find it easy enough to make, quick enough to make?
I think that actually took quite a long time, because by the time we factored in sieving all the various materials that went into it, and even sieving it twice through the different sizes, that did take a long time. It wasn't difficult, it was just time consuming.
Yeah. And we had quite a lot of volunteers as well. The thought of having to do that on a commercial nursery when you didn't have many bodies to do it. Yep. Did you find the grow blocks easy, quick to make?
Fairly easy, I think. It was a little bit fiddly the way we were doing it, like using bits of wood to tamp it down into the devices. But I don't know, if you were doing it more often or on a larger scale, there'll be ways of streamlining the process, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we felt a bit stuck in terms of scale between, we were using the sort of equipment that someone might use for an allotment or a back garden, which meant it would take a long time to make enough blocks to use. But growing on this scale, it would be too expensive to invest in bigger or mechanized grow block making equipment.
The ones we were using made like, was it 3 blocks at a time for, oh no, 4 blocks for the large and 5 for the small. But you can get ones that do like 15 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Still doing it by hand.
Yeah.
Don't know other options, but
okay. And did you find that once you've made the blocks, were they easy enough to actually maintain? Was it as easy as the system that you have for trays, or was it more difficult?
Well, because the trial was only getting the plants to the point of germination and growth and not actually planting them out, it was fairly easy because they were on capillary matting in trays and therefore easy to keep dry. And they didn't, if they were formed well, they didn't fall apart. The bit we wondered about is what would be the next step in terms of planting them out, how you would move them. And especially if you were trying to grow on a bigger scale and trying to transplant with a tractor, you know, how would you actually physically move the plants to the point where you needed to plant them?
Yeah, I agree.
And you would probably end up putting them in plastic trays to move them. And then if the point is trying to not use plastic trays, you'd need to find an alternative that you could make.
Yeah, fair enough. So here's the nub of it, really. Do you think you would make and use grow blocks again?
I think it would depend on the context. Possibly not for every crop, maybe for, I don't know, ones that get larger, like tomatoes or aubergines, or the peas seem to do quite well in it. I
Yeah,
guess it also depends on how much of the compost mix is going to be involved, and whether your process is good for making a sufficient amount of that.
And I think it would depend on if we had a reliable team of volunteers or not to come and help with the extra
Yeah.
labour when needed.
But the cost of bought-in compost isn't getting any cheaper. So at some point, but it's something that I would consider sort of doing for a crop here and there, just kind of evaluating it year on year, and maybe expanding it if it was suitable, or
Yeah.
if the alternatives were too expensive. I
Yeah,
mean,
so that covers the
you
last
always
question,
have to
really.
factor in your time, and if you're not relying on volunteers, then you've got to think about paying yourself an hourly rate to
Yeah.
sieve compost, which probably doesn't really make much sense. But then we don't get paid an hourly rate for anything. So
No, no, true. Well, that sort of covers the last question again. So thanks very much, Ian and Rachel. Tom or Connie, do you want to go next?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I have prepared. Well, not that sounds grand, but I thought about this. I can just
Yeah,
spiel,
just
if that's
rattle
okay.
on. Yeah,
Yeah.
go.
So yeah, in terms of making the compost, yeah, at first I was worried that they wasn't going to compost that well, given that we were starting in the winter, and then it stayed so wet and cold for so long, that and I was using heat probes in the compost just to see what was happening, and the temperature went up a bit, and then dipped around a little bit warmer than the air temperature for a lot of the time. So I was concerned that nothing was really happening.
Same at Tom Rick.
Yeah, but eventually it did seem like stuff was happening. We found it hard to make a recipe that we felt was like commensurate with the other people, just for this group. Just some of the things we don't have very easy access to. We don't have a load of leaf mold because we're kind of mostly in an open field, and then most of the trees near us are pines. So it was tricky to get leaf mold. But yeah, it wasn't. By the time, so then by the time it came to sifting and stuff, I was still concerned that it was too chunky. But actually, with the sifting, quite a lot of nice looking aggregated compost came out of the sifting. But Rachel and Ian said, that was quite arduous. I've got a cement mixer in our shed that I have intended to turn into a sifter, like a Riddler type thing, for about a year, that I haven't done, but I was thinking of that when that job was done. But yeah, it would be hard to do at any kind of scale in that current method. But that's sort of a given, I think, for any compost making, compost or growing media. Yeah, collecting riverbed sand also at any kind of scale feels like it would be hard to do that responsibly. Yeah, just that basically. We were lucky we have a burn near us, so we could get a wee bit, but I wouldn't want to rely on doing that for any kind of serious thing if I moved on to making more of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the soil blocking was not difficult. Once that media was made, that was the fine part of the process. Our neighbour, Connie's mum, has used soil blocks for years in her flower growing, so we kind of knew about it a bit and had seen it work, so we could ask her. But yeah, it was fine actually. We didn't have to do lots of finessing to the mix to make it hold together. Should maybe at this point acknowledge that we did do it quite late, because we it was perhaps one step too far this year to do it in the main season, but which seems silly, but yeah, it was fine. They held their shape. Yeah, they held their shape really well. we perhaps overwatered initially, because we were sort of just thinking like we were watering our trays that are on heated sand, that aren't in plastic or capillary matting until they go on to the non-heated things, and because they had the cover on to keep rodents off, I think maybe they weren't looked at properly every time watering was happening. So I think that didn't help. At first, they got maybe a bit wet, and they were a bit mossy by the end. So yeah, and in terms of would we do it again? I mean, like overall, the growth of our experience was that our transplants weren't very good. Over the growth of all of the plants wasn't very quick, and the health of them didn't look great. And then I don't know if that was something to do with our specific compost that we had made, or what it was. But I would want to be sure that if it was something we did, that I would want, to do it better. And yeah, just a scale thing, like, yeah, if we've got 10,000 transplants in the prop tunnel at any one time, we would need some kind of mechanization to make it doable, basically. But I would be interested in mechanization and thinking about how to use it. I mean, we have plastic trays now, and I don't want to throw them away, which seems, but we have like quite a lot of them, and we have durable, good ones that we've had for years now. And like Ian and Rachel said, you still use plastic in grow blocks for the solid trays. So yeah. So yeah, I guess long term we would be interested in making our own media if it was possible, for us to do it well. We do make wood chip compost that right now we mostly use to add to beds directly. We don't have the scale. Well, I'm not sure we would make enough, or make it enough of it composted down enough that we would bother to sieve it. And also, it just has so much value in the field that we've kind of prioritized getting it to a state that we can spread it in the field or on the beds, than getting it to a growing media level of fineness. And I guess in a way we are reliant on the Craftsman's peat-free Pro. We'd really like it, but it's vulnerable because we have to import it from the EU, which feels a bit mental. So I would definitely like to think about it in the future, but it's yeah, with more refinement and thinking about scale. But yeah. I think that's all my thoughts.
Right, that's really handy. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tom. On to Pam now. Would you like to give us your opinions of it, Pam, how you felt it went this year?
First of all, apologies that it took me so long to join the meeting. I've got some written notes which I'll follow, and Galia and Kerry can help me out if I'm not quite on form. I think you probably all know that the sort of basis of this trial was based on something that my husband Nick came up with. Sadly, he left us in a hurry during the first project that we did with Robin, Kerry. Galia wasn't involved then, nor was Audrey. So this was actually my fourth time of making the seed compost, vegan and non-vegan. And we've done loads of soil blocks. I say we, but the blocks were made, most of the blocks here have been made by my grandchildren who learnt from their grandpa, and they're very good soil blockers, and they're very good at sowing the seeds and labeling and things. So that was really helpful. The compost itself, I struggled particularly with the non-vegan one for the trial. We made it late, we made it in horribly cold weather. With the non-vegan one, we ended up emptying it and mixing it 3 times in a week to try and get it half decent. And for the first time, I used wood chip. Before that, we hadn't. I had a conversation with Ben Raskin when I was having a crisis about it, and he suggested adding wood chip. But echoing the other growers, that it was very labour intensive at the sieving stage because there was so much sort of big bits of material that didn't go through, whereas in previous years, yes, it's labour intensive, but not so much. Making the compost in that very cold weather wasn't a good idea, because, as Tom was saying, you know, the temperatures were just so low. So we delayed making our blocks until July. Going on to the blocks, the recipe is the recipe that Nick came up with years ago, based on trial and error and reading other people's recipes and things. We do have very good leaf mould. We have a 2-year rotation of leaf mould from our own native woodland, so that was not a problem. And we mixed it with bought horticultural sand. And then I think, Galia, you would probably be able to say a bit about the blocks themselves. The vegan blocks, I think, overall did really well in our system. Intuitively, I didn't feel that the non-vegan mix worked very well for me, and that's, as I say, because I just lost the plot, I think, a bit. And I think if I used wood chip again, I'd actually give it better temperatures and a longer term. I'm not sure if I've answered all the questions there. I would definitely keep doing it. I think it's been very good for us to integrate the blocks and the homemade seed compost for this that we've been doing, and we've in fact made another batch of compost already. So I think it's very good to keep going with that. And thanks particularly to Galia, who works in my garden and who's been a godsend, because we were short of volunteers this year. We've actually been able to incorporate the blocks again, as Nick would have done. So I would certainly go on. I think in terms of the size of the blockers, we chose those small blocks because we were just doing a trial. But on, as everybody says, if you're scaling up, you should be able to use at least bigger hand blocking tools, and they do exist. And Ladbrokes work with somebody in America on doing a hand tool that will do 50 blocks. So you could go on to that. I think also the time, just in terms of the labour of the horticultural year, you would need to sort of feed it into your cycle. And certainly when Nick and I were doing it, we started with Kerry as well. We started making the blocks, the compost in August, September, so that we could then start the blocks themselves in the spring. And I think you need to feed that, work that into a timetable. Have I answered all the questions?
Pretty much, I think, Pam. Yeah, we can anything else we can address in the questions and answers session. I'd like, if possible, for Galia to say a few words, because what we're also trying to do is we realise that this is only one relatively short project, and a lot of other very clever, experienced horticulturists have gone before us. So what we'd like to do in our final report is summarise some of the work that's been done elsewhere, so that the guidance we produce as a result of this project is based not only on our own work, but also some of the experiences of others. So Galia has been attempting to gather information from as many experienced practitioners as possible. There's not a tremendous amount written down in scientific journals or in refereed papers, if you like. So whilst we've been trying to get that sort of information from science papers and grey literature, Galia has realised that a lot of the information that's out there that's valuable is actually in growers' heads, and growers can be very, very difficult to pin down. So Galia, would you be able to say a little bit about what you've done so far and what you hope to do?
Yeah, absolutely. That was such a nice introduction, and it's so rare for me to be called a godsend. So thank you, Pam. I've heard many things in my name, but godsend is quite new. As Audrey says, just trying to get growers pinned down can be really challenging. I understand that you're all very busy. Pam works me to the bone some days. And I appreciate so much anyone who has gotten in touch with me or replied to me. I know there are a few names over here that I have maybe hounded, and it was a bit intense. I do apologize. If you have experience using grow blocks, past or present, and you want to share that experience, I would really greatly appreciate it. I will put both my phone number and my email address in the chat. Email me, WhatsApp me, text me, whatever you want. But please do get in touch. I'd really appreciate it. We are looking to do a bit of insight into sort of historic growers, people who've been using the blocks for a fair amount of time, who have quite a bit of successes and challenges of them. And I wrote notes, but I wrote so many notes. I think I've written more than I've written in the actual peer review that's next to me. But also just looking at who interested you in getting involved. I know Elliot Coleman has come up a lot. Ben Raskin's been noted a few times. He wrote a fantastic book, and he does bring it up. I think even Monty Don did a little presentation on Gardener's World one day. So if you saw that and you thought, that's brilliant, I want to try that for whatever reason, I want to hear about that. I want to put that in my paper, and I think the world wants to hear about that. So I would really appreciate it. We're looking at how we are moving away from peat and how we are moving away from plastic dependency. It was brought up that, I think Tom Breck, growers brought up that we're still using plastic. They're just not module trays now. We're using them to carry the blocks around and stuff like that. Other growers have pointed this out. There are other options, and the creativity of growers blows me away. So it might be mundane and boring to you, but I find it interesting. And everyone I talk to about this project finds it interesting. So if anyone is interested, please do get in touch. I'd really love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Galia. Is it back to me? I think it's back to me now to share the last bit of my presentation before we open up for questions and discussion.
Yeah, that's right.
Just finding the right place. So the key messages so far from the work is the initial work that we did, the very initial work, what we did was bought, I think it was about 12 or 13 different growing media. Some of those were amateur media, and some of those were amateur media, but actually quite a few of them are used by small professional growers. And then some of them were professional media. We weren't blocking at this stage, we were just putting the material into trays. And we actually compared it with very early mixes of the Tom Breck growing media. And my own medium that I've been using for a while in my garden, the house is down the Sheehan, but the compost is from my place. And I think it's fair to say that the results were actually really quite shocking. The quality of some of the professional mixes was very good. The quality of some of the amateur media, and one perhaps of the professional, was absolutely shocking. And our own homemade media, so the Dalmatian and the two Tom Breck ones, made from compost, which at Tom Breck was only 4 months old or something, it outperformed a lot of those bagged from a garden centre media. So it really underlined how absolutely dreadful some of those so-called products actually are. As I said before, it gave us rather a low bar to overcome. And it showed me very clearly that it probably is worth trying to make your own, but also trying to get quite good at it and become consistent. So I would say it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're using your own media or whether you're using something that you bought in. Be really, really careful to run germination trials first before buying any medium in bulk. And if you are making your own, it's important to realise that, as all the professional growers here tonight have said, it takes time. It's quite an investment in time, and it's worth thinking about how you can do that on a scale that actually works for you. But as Robin clearly said, your own media can be good enough. It can be as good as even some of the best. I mean, Classman media, I would say, is probably as good as you can get at the moment. There's other very good ones as well. There's some very good products from Melcourt. There's some very good products from Bulrush. But you can do just as well. I was very pleased to see that we were doing very well. We're probably not as consistent, so there was definitely differences in the 3 plant species that we were using. Some performed better than others did. Have you got any other points to add to that, Robin, before we finish and open the floor to questions?
No, not really. I think that covers it. Is to say the big positive was that actually most of at least some of the media that were produced by the growers were as good, if not better, than some of these other brands. Which was that I guess that was one of the key aims, really, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's just it. So far the outputs from this project are there's a web page, the link's there. There's 3 guidance notes already. I've still got to Robin and I've still got to write one with the results from the germination and growing trials, and I think I've been probably persuaded that I need to summarize the results and conclusions from all the laboratory testing that we've done as well, so that people can learn from that side of things, and also learn how far we've actually got to go in terms of understanding how to interpret the results of the microbiology, because at the moment, I'm afraid, I don't really feel that some of the excellent laboratories that are putting out results have the scientific evidence to back up the sort of labels that they're giving for example, numbers of active fungi, numbers of active bacteria to fungal ratios, numbers of different types of nematodes. They're calling them low, good, and poor, or something like that. Do we really know? Do we really know what we're looking for? And the other difficulty is some of the laboratories are they're using different methods. So there's not a standardization yet in the microbiology world of compost testing and soil testing to the same extent that there is for chemical testing. So we've got a lot to learn, but our knowledge is expanding all the time. So can I hand back now to Laura? And Laura, do you want to manage the questions so that you can divert the questions to the right people? And by question answerers, really, I mean myself and Robin, but absolutely also Galia, Pam, Tom, and also Ian and Rachel.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. Some really interesting results. Really good. Just having a quick look at the chat first. There's a bit of chat about the larger scale Swift blockers and so on. So if you're interested in that, have a look at the chat and you'll see what people have been saying about that. Francis has pointed out that commercial media often deteriorates during storage and transport as well. So that's another thing to take into account if you're considering.
Very true. Very true, and I must add to that as well. I was very shocked at the extent to which some garden centres are selling last year's media, and I think part of that's it's probably a lack of understanding rather than anything else. So quite often a good quality peat-based medium can be used the next year without too much problem, providing there's not too much nutrients in it. But peat-free and reduced media, they're completely different. They're living, they are alive, and if they're full of microbiology and full of microbiology that's doing its job, they're continuing to break the material down. They're producing carbon dioxide. They're producing, or if they haven't got enough air to breathe, then they're producing a lot worse than carbon dioxide. And so, yeah, they deteriorate in all sorts of ways. And if you test some of the media that you buy in garden centres, they can be sitting quite wet if they're outdoors too. And they're producing ammonia, they're producing all sorts of byproducts of anaerobic respiration. So very, very good point, Francis. That goes for our own media as well, of course. But yeah.
And Judith has just said that Melcourt have started to put a date of production on the sack, so hopefully others will follow, which is a good point. There's a question from Connor. Just wondering, has anyone thought about the use of Johnson-Su method in future trials? I don't know if Connor, you want to summarize what you've put in the chat, or if you want me to, or
Yeah, just as people they were saying about real problems with the sieving out the compost, we've just completed a sort of first year of Johnson-Su work here in northwest of Ireland and on community gardens, and I was just blown away by how there was almost complete breakdown of everything that we put in, which was a lot of high carbon material, battered kale stalks, bracken, straw, and there, you know, when we went to empty it, there was nothing there. You know, it was a beautiful compost, and without any turning. You know, it was just we had to just leave it alone, literally leave it alone for 14 months, and you know, and just like everything's 12 inches from the air. So you know, I mean, there was a slight heating up, cooling down phase. Really, much better compost than through the more interventionist methods I would be used to using. You know, so if that's something that's holding people back from making like a their own grown media, I kind of think that's a really it just seems a really effective way of doing it. And again, you've got your local microbiology, then you know, being produced in your growing media that will then be going into your ground again. You know, you're not on the blank slate, as one of your contributors was mentioning for microbiology.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And if you follow the protocol for doing that, you can get a very good compost. I've got a slight question mark in my mind about what that would do to the microbiology, because if there's no wood in it, it might not have a sufficiently high air-filled porosity for using in blocks on its own. But that's a question, that's not a statement. It's just something that I wonder about. But you can certainly make some top quality compost using that, yeah. I don't believe it's the only way, but it's a very good way.
Thank you.
Okay. Has anyone else got any other questions? Either put a hand up or shout out.
Or any points to make that things that's worked for you or not worked for you.
I had a question actually, Audrey, about bokashi. I was down at one of our compost trialists sites down in Cornwall, and Emma was using bokashi to break down some of the bigger material before composting it. So she was using it as a sort of, I don't know, would you call it a pre-compost treatment? And she was using it on sort of on bindweed roots and things like that, and that seemed to break down things very quickly as well. Do you think that would be a helpful addition?
Well,
if you're trying it in that first stage to speed things up a bit, or
very much depends on what your wastes are, because bokashi is not composting. It's often wrongly called, or some people use the term bokashi composting, and I'm trying to stop that because I regard composting as an aerobic process, and bokashi is very much an anaerobic process. So bokashi requires it's fermentation microbes, basically. It's a fantastic thing, and bokashi can work really, really well on non-woody wastes, but it will not work on woody wastes. So if what you're trying to break down is woody material, then bokashi will do nothing for you at all. But that doesn't mean to say it's not useful. It can work as a pre-composting phase. How it would work alone to produce a growing medium, well, that's a completely different project, I think. I've no idea. It might work really well, but I've never tested it. But I think bokashi's a fantastic technique for rotting down lots of different kinds of organic wastes, providing there's not woody material in it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, has anyone got any other questions? No.
Has anyone thought to use anything? Because I've got a wormery, but I haven't used anything from it as yet. But I did buy some compost this year that I was really disappointed with. And somebody pointed out that I had a wormery and why wasn't I using it, which is a really good point. And I looked at the quality of it and it's fantastic. So
I would be very careful about using that in grow blocks, because worm compost is it's like the poultry manure of manures. So it's absolutely fantastic, but it's really, really rich. So you'd have to be careful if you were using it. I mean, the reason we diluted our hot bin compost was because it on its own, the nutrient levels were a little bit too high.
Could you make a tea from it then and then add that to your compost?
You could, or you could add the it would make a very good feed. Worm compost there's something magical about it that we don't fully understand, but it works very, very well as a sort of tonic for plants. Or you could put it in, or I mean, others may have better experience of doing this than I do. They probably do in this audience, but I have used worm vermicompost in small quantities in growing media, and it works really, really well. But if you overdo it, it's so nutrient rich. Any really nutrient rich compost actually really needs diluted, and that is why we use Nick's recipe, which has got the leaf mold, leaf mold is, again, it's a bit like worm compost. It's a magical ingredient. It's got things that we don't fully understand, but it's got lots and lots of active fungi and bacteria in it, and beneficial nematodes and so on. And we use the leaf mold to dilute the compost, which is a little bit too salty and a little bit too nutrient rich to be used on its own. And worm compost, you would have to dilute it with something, I would say. But I mean, there's probably others in this audience that have used it more than I have.
Ian, you had your hand up.
Hello, yeah, good evening. Yes, I've been sort of a voyeur in the background here for the last hour. I wasn't going to speak up because I'm obviously tend to take over some of these discussions, but as there's
Feel
a bit
free.
of time, maybe I could just explain a little bit about what we've been doing for a very long time. I think many of you may well be aware of what we've been doing. I wanted to really talk a little bit about the composition of what we do, which is a pure wood chip compost. We don't use anything else, just pure wood chip. The discussion earlier on about the length of time of composting is important. We are composting our wood chip, which we make in a windrow system, and we're doing about well, for plant substrate use, we're doing about 15 cubic meters a year, but we actually make around 250 cubic meters of wood chip compost anyway. We leave it for at least a year and a half before we transport it to where we're going to do the final processing. The final processing is through a rotary turner. We have a relatively medium-sized electrically operated turner, which takes out a lot of the work of the sieving. I know sieving by hand is a real pain. So it goes through a sieve. We're adding around 20% vermiculite. There's two reasons for vermiculite. One is to dilute the substrate because it's much too high in nitrogen. It's very rich. And two is to improve the water holding capacity. Wood chip does not hold, well, nothing holds water in the same way that peat does. And this was the big problem we faced when we started this years ago. What we have found is this very simple mix, is purely wood chip compost and the vermiculite and nothing else. Works for everything. We use it as a seed substrate. We use it as a plant raising substrate. We don't have any different materials to add to it at all. We very occasionally will add a little bit of a vegan fertilizer if we're growing alliums for a long period of time. Alliums tend to be quite difficult, but apart from that, we don't use any additions at all. We've done blocking with it. We've had quite a lot of trials with blocking. It works very well. It sort of defies all logic. We mix it up incredibly wet, so it looks like absolute mud. You could not imagine how anything could possibly grow in this. It grows really well. We did some trials over 2 years with Calabrese. It certainly outperformed our modules, plastic module trays. It was much more work. I mean, for us, we haven't gone over to blocking primarily because I think this has come up with several people, the extra work involved in blocking and getting the right sort of technology at the right price to do it on, for many of us, what is a relatively medium-sized scale doesn't really work out. We raise around 50,000 modules a year, and to do just half of those in blocks would be quite expensive to set up and wouldn't really give us any real advantages, other than there is an advantage in that we feel that with blocking, we do actually get a slightly better plant. And that has been shown right the way through to final harvest. But the actual improvement in the yield probably doesn't make enough difference to really invest in what for us would be quite a large amount of money to make this work. So I think this has come up, I think, with several people. It's not easy to do this on a relatively small scale. The other thing I want to say is there is an option to blocking, there is an option to modules, and that is peg plants. We have converted more than half of our production, so we're producing over 50, 60,000 plants a year from pegs, particularly things like things like leeks and brassicas, which require absolutely no infrastructure at all other than a bit of ground somewhere on your farm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Ian. That's really interesting.
Well, it's
Audrey,
it's
did you wanna
really
say-
yeah, it's really helpful. But because I also have come to the conclusion that I think I don't really need to add anything else to my composts other than Ramiel wood chip. It's there's something magical about it. It's absolutely amazing. The chemical tests back that up. And it's only for sensitive seeds that I feel I need to dilute it with something. The only reason I didn't go for vermiculite, I see why you would, especially on a commercial scale, was because I was trying not to use a high carbon footprint material. And that's why I went for leaf mold. But on a big scale, you could not use leaf mold. You'd have to do something else if you needed to dilute. And I think my first choice would also be vermiculite. So, but yeah, it was Ben Raskin and your own work, Ian, that made me think I've got to persevere a bit with this Ramiel wood chip idea. And once you begin to get that right and work out what works and what's not so good, it really is pretty much unbeatable.
Great. Pam, did you have something to add? Oh, you're on mute still.
It was about the labour-intensive nature of making the blocks. In our previous trials, we took a lot of the seedlings on to harvest, and certainly transplanting them and watching them get away really quickly made less work at that stage.
Okay, brilliant. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Someone has mentioned that bokashi goes really well with food waste. Is anyone
Yes.
working with food waste as a growing media, as a type of waste we all produce? And that's, I guess, to anyone, if anyone else is doing that. Okay, I guess it's quite an inconsistent product, isn't it? If you're using food waste, it varies quite a lot. Okay, another question then. Has anyone used the soil blocking recipes in the Ladbrokes website, for example, Monty Don's? And has anyone added biochar to their recipes? Again, that's to anyone, anyone who's been doing this. Yeah,
Can I just say something about coir? Monty Don's recipe uses coir.
Right.
And whilst it is very difficult to find a direct replacement for peat because peat has so many advantages. And coir does sound, on the face of it, to be a pretty good direct replacement for peat. But it's got various challenges. For a start, there's not anything like enough to go round. And for a second, I'm involved in a piece of work at the moment with, or I have been, and I'm about to be involved in another piece of work with Forest Research, who have been studying a very large number of coir samples from all over the world, including, well, all imported into the UK from Sri Lanka and various places, and also some recycled coir, which is being used in England on fields, and it's being actually used in the production of growing media as well. And so Sarah Green and Debbie Fredrickson of Forest Research have tested lots of different types of peat alternative constituents, including primarily coir, and they have found a worryingly wide range, DNA from a worryingly wide range of plant pathogenic species. So we know that by importing coir to this country, there is a bit of a risk. And certainly if you were using recycled coir at the moment, despite the fact that the company that's doing that is taking great pains to sterilize the stuff, or to pasteurize it rather, to sanitize it, there's issues. There's definitely issues. And what we are beginning to realize is that peat alternatives, because they're not sterile, they're going to have a microbiological component, and some of that microbiological component is most certainly not good. So it's just something to think about. We're on a quite steep learning curve at the moment, working out what's actually in there.
Ian, I think you had your hand up as well. You're also on mute.
Yes, in connection with the biochar question, we did some work with biochar when we did the original innovative farming trials. I think this was nearly 10 years ago. If anybody's interested, that work is on agroecology website and also the Organic Research website. We compared biochar with non-biochar. We also used it with Classman's, and we used it with our own mix. So we had 4 different mixes going on. The biochar didn't show any significant advantage in any respect. In fact, there was a slight disadvantage, although it was not statistically significant, on disease pressure on leeks in the ultimate harvest, but that was not enough to be really significant. However, the problem, I think, really with the biochar for us not actually showing any results at all is because my own personal feeling is that the wood chip substrate we make is so incredibly high in biological activity that the biochar cannot actually add anything more than is already there. I think in some materials and some mixes, possibly the biochar could be beneficial. It is very expensive. This is a bit of a problem with it, but I wouldn't dismiss it. But certainly in our trial, there was no advantage in biochar at all.
That's interesting. Dinah also puts in the chat that biochar needs to be inoculated before adding to anything. But she's Dinah's putting it in the compost pile. Okay. Any more questions? There's nothing more in the chat. There's some interesting comments. But has anyone got any questions for any of the growers or for Audrey or anyone?
I just want to add that, or maybe you were going to add yourself, Laura, that I'm going to be speaking on this topic at a session at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. I think maybe somebody, perhaps Francis is as well, and some people from Riverford. So there's going to be a few different speakers at that session, which is going to be about homemade growing or nursery-made growing media and compost and blocking at the conference on the Friday morning. So that's available if anybody's either there in person or do come along, and if not, then tickets are available online, I think. So I'm hoping that we'll get some good discussions going at that event as well.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I had it on my list to say, but I had forgotten. So yes, thanks, Audrey. Yeah, it should be really interesting because Riverford are running trials on a larger scale. Obviously, this one is looking really small scale, but Riverford are looking on field scale models of peat-free blocking. So it should be really interesting to see the difference between the 2 scales there. Okay. Again, there's a few more comments in the chat. Has anyone got any other questions? Otherwise, we've got 4 minutes to go and we could wrap it up. Have anyone got any other questions? And Audrey, any of the growers, did you have any other last comments that you wanted to make?
Not for me.
No. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Well, then we'll wrap up now with 3 minutes to go. Thanks everyone for coming along. That's been really interesting, and thank you so much to our speakers and trialists who've been working hard on this for, is it 2 years now, Audrey? Was it just, well, I can't remember. It feels like it's been
Gosh,
2 years.
I think it's probably about a year and a half.
Year and a
the
half-ish, yeah.
yeah, we didn't actually. The one thing we didn't mention is that the Pebble Trust, which is a fantastic charity, has funded some add-on work to this. And Galia and myself and Pam in particular will be using some of the funds from that. And Pebble Trust have also funded some of the extra microbiology testing and chemical testing that we've done on the growing media that we have made. So although the Innovative Farmers project, this Grow Blocks project, is going to be finishing, I think, at the end of December at the latest, the Pebble Trust project doesn't finish till, I think, the spring next year. So there'll be some publications on the same topic coming out funded by the Pebble Trust, which we can hopefully just put on the Innovative Farmers website as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. And yeah, I think it would be, all the results will also go on the Innovative Farmers website. And all, obviously, Audrey's guidance notes as well. So brilliant. Okay, thanks very much. And as I say, you know, I've put the website in the chat, so have a look at Audrey's guidance notes. This is being recorded, so I will get in touch if you want a recording to send on to anyone or anything. And Audrey, are your slides available as a PDF if anyone's interested?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send them to you as a PDF, Laura, and you can just stick them on the website. I mean, it's just, brilliant. I just really want to thank the growers that have done and will do help with this project, because it's like so many of the big strides that are being made in regenerative farming and organic farming now. These strides are being made by farmers and growers. Much less research being done perhaps in regenerative farming, because the big chemical companies are not making money out of selling anything. So a lot of the you know, to drive regenerative farming, not in the same extent anyway. So a lot of this, the new work that's being done, is being driven by farmers and growers. And what we need to be doing is helping farmers and growers to speak to one another more and share knowledge. And that's what this project very much follows, that trend. So thank you very much to all who've contributed to it.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really true. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, get in touch if you've got any further questions and we can share the slides and so on. But have a good rest of your evenings. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Bye.
Bye.